We have another rumored fight in the works that would continue the UFC streak of making a stacked and loaded few months to end off the year, with October already being incredible and now November with MSG already looking amazing. And now we have a rumored main event in the works for UFC Qatar. And this is the UFC's first event in Qatar. Qatar in the Middle East. The UFC loves putting on the most stacked cards in the Middle East. It's just the money that Dana's been, for. So obviously he wants to, impress, especially in a new location. And they're deciding to maybe go with Arman Tsarukyan versus Dan Hooker for this fight, which makes a lot of sense because Arman has been alluding to having a fight ready in October or November because he is ready to fight. We've not seen him fight since UFC 300. And of course, Arman, one of the best lightweights on the planet, was a rightful number one contender and then ended up losing his title shot. And then we have Dan Hooker. I mean, right off the bat, you just got to say that both of these guys, we have not seen both of these guys fight in a very, very long time. We haven't seen Arman since UFC 300. And we haven't seen Dan Hooker since UFC 305. Both had to pull out of fights to injuries. Arman pulled out of his big main event title fight with Islam for a chance at the lightweight belt, while Dan Hooker had a very good ranked fight planned with Justin Gaethje, which would have been a certified violent classic. That ended up getting scrapped because Dan Hooker had to pull out due to an injured hand, which has kept him out for all this time. Now, I've always been, and probably this fight will forever be with me, the fight that I definitely wanted to see the most and hurt the most to not see happen a day before it was supposed to happen. And that was supposed to be Arman Tsarukyan versus Islam Makhachev. A very highly, highly anticipated fight where we all really felt like Arman was the best test and challenge for Islam in the lightweight division in the peak of his career, prime shape, coming off a great win versus Charles Oliveira. Arman fought Islam way back in the day, lost that fight, but since then it's completely a difference between, it's like day and night. Like Arman was a completely different fighter going into UFC 311 than he was in that fight earlier on, with the amount of experience, and then him just beating up on like Yoel Alvarez, Gamrot, and of course Charles Oliveira. So Arman Tsarukyan was in prime shape to take on Islam, pulls out a day before due to an injured back with the weight cut, whatever stories or excuses. We lost out on that fight. And it's probably been the hardest things to come to terms with, that we lost out on that fight so far, at least for me. I know that was definitely the biggest hard-hitting loss of a fight. But Arman Tsarukyan has been ready, and he's been ready for a while. And maybe he should have gotten the title shot over Charles. In the end, the UFC's like, no, you screwed us over, so you're back in the line. And Dana White really kept to what he said. So Arman is now facing probably another fight to earn again his chance at a title shot versus Ilia Topuria. And originally I thought that clear cut after Paddy won in Miami, I think that the Arman and Paddy could have been a sick matchup. And then people were already trying to put Paddy ahead of him in the line to just get his title shot at Ilia, because maybe that fight would be massive and sell more pay-per-views just because of the beef. They faced off in the octagon. And then you have Justin Gaethje in the background, who is complaining that because he's 4-5 in his last fights, and even though he got chinned by Max Holloway, but it was kind of an exhibition fight, and then he won a decision versus Rafael Fiziev, that really he should be getting the title shot, or it is a retirement for him. So this is just a little bit of the lightweight picture as of recently, because you have Paddy, Justin, and Arman all trying to get their foot ahead to be that next person up against Ilia Topuria, who Ilia Topuria is probably one of the best, if not the best fighters on the planet right now. Obviously, the undefeated champion at this top of the lightweight, which is also lightweight's the premier division. Whatever, I'm rambling, but yeah, so this makes a lot of sense to put Arman in Qatar, I guess, as the main event. But honestly, and let me just be quite honest, I don't think this fight, it's cool, I guess, but really, Arman's going to destroy Dan Hooker. I don't really care. I don't really get so much excitement about this fight. I think Arman Tsarukyan not I think, I'm 90% sure, and I think most other MMA YouTubers will pick Arman to just absolutely run through and destroy Arman Tsarukyan. I mean, what am I saying? Dan Hooker. Arman to destroy Dan Hooker. Because Dan Hooker, like, sure, he's entertaining. He's a fun, like, stand and bang kind of fighter, right? He likes to just put on entertaining, classic, like, slugfests. Like what he did versus Dustin Poirier, what he would have had with Justin Gaethje, and then in his last fight that we've seen him, which again was also a really long time, versus Gamrot, crazy violent fight, and then he put on a war pretty much, and Dan Hooker just loves to slug it out and has that long rangy arms that he uses to strike and everything. He's a very violent fighter, is what I'm trying to say. Dan Hooker is entertaining for sure. But when it comes to a matchup like Arman Tsarukyan, who is one of the best lightweights on the planet, one of the best fighters, and potentially could have given Islam Makhachev a very competitive fight, is extremely just... His wrestling and grappling game is, compared to Dan Hooker barely has that. Like, Arman is going to run through Dan Hooker, in my opinion. So this fight, as much as it's like, I guess, cool that Arman's returning, I would have much rather have seen him versus Paddy Pimblett to really decide who that next guy could be, because Paddy is younger and could be more of, I guess, a challenge when it comes to the exchanges with the grappling, ground game. Arman's just going to dominate Dan Hooker, bro. That's it. Like, but I guess, I don't know. I can't really be too excited about that. That's just my honest thoughts about this rumored fight. We don't know for sure, but I think this is very likely. Because we heard Shavkat and Sean Brady might be doing this card. But that's definitely not happening. So this makes a lot more sense, I guess, because Arman wants to fight. And, I mean, maybe I really would have wished they would have saved Arman to fight Ilya in, like, December. That seems like the plan. But now Alexandre Topuria is supposed to be fighting at Qatar. So that means that Ilya is going to be very heavily involved in Alexandre Topuria's camp. So when they're involved in each other's camps, they can't prepare for fights simultaneously. Unless really they can. Ilya could still prepare for a fight while his brother's training with him in his home gym. Like, I don't see why that has to be such an issue, but they like to corner each other. So I guess that's just how it's going to go. Like, now we're going to have to wait even longer to see Ilya Topuria return in the octagon, possibly until 2026. While Arman gets this fight out of the way, he's probably going to destroy Dan Hooker, and then he will be undeniable for that title shot, unless they then do Pimblett versus Gaethje. But now we're hearing that they're going to save Gaethje maybe for Topuria. That the UFC is just going to give in to Gaethje's whining and give Gaethje a title shot just for Ilya Topuria to end his career. So that's how I see everything going. But that's kind of the rumored fight right now in Qatar. Arman versus Dan Hooker. You know, Dan Hooker, sure, he's entertaining, he's violent, but I don't think he really stands much of a chance. Sure, they have the beef too, like they went back and forth, but Dan Hooker ain't on that level, bro. He just ain't on that level. Justin Gaethje would have been a much better fight for Dan Hooker than Arman Tsarukyan. So, and then another thing I just quickly want to talk about is like Khabib, like a week ago or a week and a half ago, was caught saying like that Arman is 80%. He only gives Ilya Topuria a 20% chance of beating Arman Tsarukyan, and that the other 80 goes to Arman Tsarukyan. That's just glazing, bro. Like, that's just glazing Arman and putting, what's Khabib saying, man? Khabib, like, for sure, has extremely high fighting IQ. Their entire Dagestani culture, it's all about fighting, for sure. They have the most dominant legacy and everything, but, like, to really give a fighter like Ilya Topuria a 20% chance at beating Arman when he has a great wrestling and grappling base that, sure, we haven't seen enough of. It's definitely not better than Arman's, but he has enough of wrestling and grappling base where he was able to get away from Charles. And eventually, when it was on the feet in the very first striking exchange, Topuria chinned Charles Oliveira and put him to sleep in the very first chance that he got to put a combo on him. So I just think it's a little bit of a crazy statement when Khabib said, but you could let me know, like, no, I don't think Ilya Topuria, he ain't gonna disrespect my favorite fighter like that. He ain't gonna disrespect. I don't know. I'm saying, like, I'm gonna do something. I'm not gonna do nothing. I'm just saying this is what I think. That Topuria definitely has more than a 20% chance of beating Arman. And yeah, Ilia Topuria. So that's my Ilia Topuria glazing segment of this video. And then finally, another fight that is rumored to be finalized for UFC Qatar, maybe the co-main event, is Shara Magomedov versus Paulo Costa. Because Paulo Costa literally said, or tweeted or something, that he was offered the fight versus Shara in Qatar, and he said, yes, sounds fun. I'm going to poke him in his other eye so he'll fight 100% blind. Paulo Costa antics. And I'm not going to lie, I thought Paulo Costa was going to lose versus Romy Kopylov. I really thought Paulo Costa was about to fall off, but he won pretty decisively versus Romy Kopylov at UFC 318. So Paulo Costa and also Shara Magomedov also bounced back. Lost to Michael Venom Page after being undefeated, after his violent and highlight like spinning elbow KO on Arman Petrosian, came back, lost to the MVP, but then came back and beat Marc-Andre Barriault. But he got his nose broken in that fight, and he didn't finish him, so people still have their doubts and concerns about Shara if he's a legitimate contender and fighter. He's definitely very good. He's definitely very skilled, but can he be on that top level? Well, this is a great next test for him to take on Paulo Costa, who has been a top 10, top 8 ranked middleweight for most of his career. So Paulo Costa and Shara, this is a fun fight in UFC Qatar. Both guys bouncing back from their previous fights, so I like this fight. I thought Paulo Costa maybe could fight Whitaker, or maybe he even could fight Dricus. But this is also kind of is cool. This makes sense to see a cool fight like this on the feet. So that is what we have so far for UFC Qatar. Arman and Hooker in the works. Shara versus Paulo Costa in the works. Alexandre Topuria versus some other guy. I'm sure they're gonna add a bunch of other really cool fights. Maybe the Bogdan Guskov. I don't know. They always go like super stacked on these Middle East cards, especially when it's their first time there. So we're gonna just stay tuned on some more announcements. And yeah, catch you guys in the next one. Probably gonna recap UFC Paris.